Hi, I am the Reverend Karen G. Johnston. My pronouns are she and her. And I currently serve our congregation in Burlington, Vermont, the Unitarian Universalist Society, Burlington. I am a light-skinned woman with short hair, with a streak of both purple and red glasses on the top of my head. I'm middle-aged with wearing a white shirt with purple. I have behind me a Buddha face, a beautiful hand-painted bee, and something from Bread and Puppet, a piece of art that has an elephant holding the earth on its back. Before I became a minister, I was a clinical social worker. I have been trained as an end of life or death doula, and the heart of my spiritual practice is befriending death. I am the author and founder of Date with Death Club, which is a justice affirming, secular, curriculum-based way for people to explore mortality in community. And it's actually one that somewhere between 2 and 3 dozen UU congregations have already used and provided, as well as some public libraries and senior centers. The curriculum itself is free. It's available online at the website, which is datewithdeathclub.com. Um, I am filled with gratitude for the GA planning team who said yes to this. Reverend JeKaren and I have been wanting to do this together for a long time, and this year was the year our schedules aligned, and they said yes. And I'm super thankful to her as well for the chance to spark together. I want to express gratitude just because of the work of Date with Death Club and my mortality ministry to those who've helped grow it into what it is. There were 5 ministers who led a pilot program in 21, 22, and there were other people in our UU universe who helped create the curriculum. Alex Capitan, Terry Ashley, who's a layperson in Colorado, some folks read it for Justice, a Justice screen, Kimberly Quinn Johnson. And I want to say thank CB Beale for whom their conceptualization of radical preemptive inclusion is a key part of how we deliver Date with Death Club. In addition to those expressions of gratitude, I want to name my teachers and mentors on my spiritual path when it comes to befriending death. And those are Larry Rosenberg, Judy Leaf, Roshi Joan Halifax, and Joanna Macy and the whole community of the work that reconnects. So I'm so glad to be here with you.
Hi, I'm Reverend JeKaren Bell. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a Black woman with brown skin, medium brown skin, uh, Black locks that are shoulder length, wearing a light blue Tiffany glasses and a chalice pendant. I'm so glad to be here with you today. I'm here because I have had a similar path to Reverend Karen in that I became an end of life doula and a grief doula about the time that I started seminary. And through that process of learning about death and grief, I have formed my own project called Wisdom of Legacy, which is an art based spiritual guidance program that connects people with their ancestry about figuring out who they are in the present moment and then building legacies that last. And so it is a great honor to be here because we have for years talked about like what it means to be a Unitarian Universalism, be in Unitarian Universalism and offer um, conversations and um, opportunities to connect around death and grief. The work that I do comes out of a love of helping people grow and heal. So much of what we hold in our hearts has to do with like, these experiences that we're having. And grief is a big part of that. We all grieve. And so it's super important to me to create these spaces that allow people to grieve properly and to heal properly. And doing it through art is just my own special way of connecting. Having a visual representation of your grief in the process of learning and growing and healing is just incredibly powerful. So I am grateful to be here.
I really appreciate that you add it's grief and death doula, right? That these are one and the same. And that's part of the three parts that we want to talk about today, right? Grief, legacy, and interdependence. So we're going to move right into grief. And I think so many of us have been misinformed about the nature of grief and what it is to move through grief, how to heal in the midst of grief. And I think capitalism has been fine with us being misinformed. There's kind of this attempt to put us into small little boxes and say we must be fine at this point in order to go out into the world. And that's a problem. So I'm going to guess that most everyone, at least a lot of people, have heard of like the 5 stages of death that come from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And I think these have been really powerful in helping to name and give sort of some language to understand the grief process. But you may not know it, but they were those 5 stages. She actually observed them in people who were dying, not the people who were losing someone they loved. And that doesn't mean that they're wrong, but it just means that sometimes we've kind of tried to make something that fits over here, and it might not be quite right. And in fact, of the 5 stages that she named, right, which are denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance, is that people have had years, decades to engage with that. And they were like, okay, 5, but I think there's 7. Well, I think there's 9. I think there's 10. So there's not like a cut rule, like somewhere in the world of physics that says there are only this many stages in the grief cycle. And in fact, when we think a little bit about moving through grief, I think some of the misinformation is that it's this linear process that we go from this stage to that stage to that stage. But I love this image that you're seeing, which is sometimes like this. Not just in those 5, but moving all around, back and forth and through and over and around. And I think when we understand that grief is far messier than what society allows, then we are moving towards health and healing. I do want to share with you this conceptualization that I've encountered, because I think how we think about grief and how we think about moving through grief can help us or harm us. If we think that we're supposed to be done in 7 days because we get 7 days, if we're lucky off of work, then that's going to harm us, because grief doesn't work in that rule base. But how we think about grief affects our healthily moving through it. So I want to share with you one conceptualization that I have found helpful for me, and I have found especially helpful for those people who feel that healing from grief is an act of disloyalty, that it's an act of letting go of somebody that they love, that if I let go of my grief, I'm letting go of the person I love. It's named after Dr. Lois Tonkin. But if you hear the origin story of this concept, she'll say that she learned it. She was presenting on grief, and one of the participants, whose name has been lost to posterity, spoke about losing her child and talked about her own experience. And it was Dr. Tonkin who brought it forward, and his name is with it. But let's just recognize this unnamed person. The idea is that instead of grief getting smaller over time because we heal from it, and maybe let go of it completely. The idea is that grief stays about the same size, but as we continue to be alive, engaged in the world, we get bigger and our life grows alongside with our grief as a companion. And I think that that is true for so many people I have encountered, that grief doesn't go away, but we find a way for it to be more manageable. And in this graphic that I've um, made, I think it starts with jagged edges. So much of our grief starts with jagged edges. But over time, instead of the idea of it getting smaller, I think it might get smoother if we're lucky. It gets smoother so it doesn't hurt so much, but we learn to live with it. So I think that that is what I want to offer here today about grief. And I'm looking forward to what you have to say.
Listening to you share, the misconceptions about grief makes me really think about our principle of love, our value of love. Grief, you don't often associate love with grief, but that's what grief is, right? Like it's this expression of love that we're holding for people who are no longer here. And so here we are, like, being tasked with, moving forward and holding the memory of someone we love, someone we care about. And there's this idea that like we have to get over it and it has to move on quickly and we have to get back to normal, right? Is the thing that we always hear. And you get 3 days off of work if you're lucky, to for the funeral, but then like you got to get back into work very quickly. Like that is the experience of most people. And so as we think about grief, if we can think about it as a form of love, like how do we love when we are holding on to relationships that are now one-sided, right? In the sense of like they can't love us back, they can't tell us physically, you know it, you feel it, and grief is an opportunity to transform, right? It's an opportunity to make that love something tangible and something accessible. It's not just in your brain, right? Like it's okay to think about how much you love someone that's no longer here, but you're still feeling it in your body. You feel it in your chest, you feel it in your stomach. Like sometimes, like, your hands tingle or, you get chills when you think about them. All of those things are really important to thinking about our experience of grief. And so I love to think about grief as an opportunity to express that love. So I think a lot about in my work dealing with ancestorship, about building altars or writing letters to, I say my ancestors, but that's really anyone that I've ever loved and who's no longer here. I call them my ancestors. And so I write letters to my ancestors. I talk to them. I set altars for them. I celebrate them on their birthdays and major holidays, and I tell them how much I love them and miss them, right? And so it becomes less of a thing that grief is like trap them here, and they become part of every aspect of my being, right? And so that grief kind of like it transcends death, right? It becomes, oh, I'm holding this grief, but really I'm holding this love for someone that meant so much to me. And we know that that can be complicated. You can have a complicated relationship with someone and still love them. You could be mad at someone and they die and you're still mad at them, right? Like that happens, but it doesn't change the fact that there was a connection, is a connection, the love still exists, and it's okay to hold on to that. Um, I'll say one last thing about love and grief is that in these moments when we know that we are grieving and we are ready to acknowledge that the sadness that we're feeling, or even the joy that we're feeling, is a result of the grief that we're holding, it's an opportunity to slow down and feel what you're feeling. There's no right way to grieve, and there there are people who will tell you, oh, you got to check a box and you got to do this thing and you light a candle and you're good to go. And that is just not true. Just like Karen drew in the map of what grief actually looks like, it changes, it's fluid. And I love the description you give where you say that you believe that it smooths. And I love that, right? When you lose someone, that jaggedness, it's such a shock to the system sometimes. And over time, like it's still there, like it is still present, but hopefully over time you infuse it with more love and it smooths. And I'm going to use that forever as an example because I think that is so beautiful.
Can I spark off of what you were just saying? Um, so two things. One is right now my partner is making a table and he's using some barn planks that and he's smoothing it out with epoxy. And I am and I'm not a great fan of epoxy because it's so plasticky, but it is, I wonder if I can think about the epoxy as that love. And so it's that's where the smoothness comes from. It's not from a wearing down, but it's kind of the love's attention, gently buffing it maybe or filling in the spaces. The other thing I think about when I hear you talking about how it sounds like grief and love as, the same thing, just right, one coin, two sides. It reminds me of Joanna Macy talking about the pain we feel for what's going on in the world, and she applies it to the climate crisis, but frankly it's about systemic oppression, it's about the rise of fascism, it's about all these things, that the reason it's so painful is because of our connection to the world, our love for the world. If we didn't love the world, and frankly, if we weren't a part of the world that is being harmed, then we wouldn't feel the pain, the grief in the same way. So I think that there's a lot there, yeah. And I really felt it when you said, like, when I create these altars in honor to name and honor my ancestors, instead of being here, they're here all around. And boy, yeah, that makes so much sense to me.
I love that. Thank you. Yes. I mean, we think about, grief as also like being so limited to this space of like the death of a person. But we know grief is a lot more than that, right? Like we think about like the death of a pet, but also like it's a loss, right? So it's a more general loss, like the loss of an idea, the loss of a dream, like all of these things are so heavily connected to our ability to process grief. And, we have, things that leave us all the time, right? Like we didn't get that opportunity we thought we should get, or, there was a squirrel that used to visit us and we haven't seen it in a long time and we think, they're gone, right? Um, and those things, like those are like, smaller things that kind of, chip at our heart in some ways, and then there are the bigger things that make big craters, but our ability to keep loving through that allows us to fill it in. And so it's never like once something is gone, once something is lost, it never comes back, and like that part of you is gone too, right? It's when you are intentionally building your life with love and acknowledging that loss will always be part of it, that grief like is there, and like it has its way of like bumping up against each other, right? Because it's not just one grief, right? There are many, and they rub up against each other. And what happens when water rubs up against stone, right? Like it smooths it. So I'm
Mm.
just really in love with this analogy, just holding that so dearly.
Yeah. Oh, I'm just wondering about having a rough stone and a smooth stone in our hands, and to remember that both are good and worthy of our attention and our love. I really appreciated you saying that grief comes in so many packages, so many ways, and that there are some that are acknowledged they fit into the world in which says, yeah, I recognize your grief. I remember when my mother died, I kind of wanted something within our Unitarian Universalist tradition that was an outward sign to let people know that I was grieving, and I really longed for that. But I think also there are griefs, and there's disenfranchised grief, and I know we talked about wanting to talk a bit about this. These griefs that aren't recognized, maybe because they're secret, maybe we had a relationship with someone that it wasn't publicly acknowledged, maybe it's because of systemic oppressions that don't allow for the wider society to recognize um, a relationship or a loss. And the thing is, I think we all experience forms of disenfranchised grief and we don't even know it. And I think the COVID pandemic helped us see a little bit of it. I think a lot of people have said, no, let's put it away. But when we didn't get to go to the graduations or all the things that we lost, and we tried to say, I'm okay with it, that's disenfranchised grief if we don't get to be able to process it. When we raise our trans children and know that we can't raise them in as much safety, that's a form of disenfranchised grief if we don't have a chance to name it and process it. And I think that's true on so many levels. I wonder what you think about that.
That's so true. I think that we've been living in this state of grief for such a long time that I think we've forgotten that we are, and so we're trying to operate as if it doesn't exist. And it comes up in really weird ways. Like there's heightened anxiety, and there is the loss of like the ability for people to connect. So it's harder to make friends as an adult, right? And I've heard this before, but not like now. Like it's been harder recently because people have been turning inward, right? And that idea of community care doesn't spread as far as it used to. And so if you are in a community where that's a priority, you've worked really intentionally to do it. But a lot of people haven't had the space for that. I mean, even during the COVID pandemic, there were millions of people still working, right? We call them essential workers. And so they never got a break. They never got a chance to slow down and process. And then you had other people who were totally isolated, right? And they got a chance to process it, but it was too much time to process. And so it was really hard to like get back into the flow of things. And I say all of this to say that like none of these are right or wrong. That's just where we are as a society. And so in order for us to be able to heal, we have to acknowledge that we've gone through this thing and all of these things right now, where I can make a whole list, you could make a whole list, right? And, until we are willing to acknowledge that that grief exists, we can't actually heal from it and change the way that we see the world or that we love each other. And you're going to hear me say that a lot. I talk a lot about what it means to love each other because that's what community does. And that is so important. Um,
I'm just going to say, I think you have a reputation, well earned at GA 2024 about being the love lady. I love you.
I do. There was one other thing that I wanted to mention. Um, you were talking about when your mother died, you wanted to have like something that would represent that, like you were grieving, that you were going through this process. And it made me think about some research that I've been doing for years. And you're probably going to laugh, but it's it is something that I have delved into like so deeply, and kind of what started the process of me even considering becoming a deaf doula. It was the memorial T-shirts. So often what happens in the Black community is that when someone they love dies, they get their faces put on a T-shirt with their name, their birth year, and the date of death. And I've not seen it anywhere else, but it is something that is a major industry for acknowledging the grief that someone is carrying. And it has spread out into lots of other things. Like there are like buttons that are worn. Sometimes you'll see on cars, like there'll be car decals with like their name and date of birth and death. All of these ways of like showing grief, showing that this person was loved. We don't want this person to be forgotten. This person meant so much to me. And I remember talking to someone about this, and they were like, I don't understand why people do this. It's so weird. I was like, what is weird about loving someone? Like, I hope when I die, all of my friends get t-shirts made with my face. And it has to be the picture of me doing something very silly. Like, it can't be a serious one, right? And it just like, and if you talk to that person, you ask them, oh, tell me about your friend, then you get to hear about how much love and care and how deeply meaningful this person was to them. And that is a gift to be able to hear a love story. And I
Mm.
don't mean like a romantic love story, like
No, no.
iconic, like I love this person and I'm willing to wear their face on a t-shirt so everybody knows that I loved them. And it literally gives me goosebumps thinking about it. Like the way that we love is so important in our grief. And so, one day I will like do a whole thing on what I learned. And like, there are businesses out here that only do this. They
Wow.
only make these t-shirts. So, we should start a new thing in Unitarian Universalism. When someone has a memorial, we ask them if they want a t-shirt with a person's face on it, you know?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Thank you for telling us story.
Absolutely.
So we're going to talk about legacy. And I'll add, and Reverend JeKaren will add, and then we'll spark off of each other. And I'm going to root us in some of our Unitarian Universalist history. And though I'll be speaking about Boston and Unitarianism mostly, I just want to acknowledge like we are so much wider and so much bigger than just Unitarian history and Boston area. And some of what I'm about to share with you is I got from a book which that Edward Searle wrote called "Teaching the World to Die." It's a really slim volume, but basically it tells us that Unitarians were on the forefront of shifting cultural experiences of what it is to die in the United States, what it is to have a cemetery. So in the early 19th century, Unitarians led the way in the nation's first rural cemetery, which was a part of a larger cultural movement that arose because there were concerns about how bodies were being disposed. In the early 1800s, city graveyards had become basically neglected, overcrowded, and unsanitary. So something that came out of this, some folks who are in the Boston area know about Mount Auburn Cemetery. It it's a garden cemetery. It became a destination. Kind of there were pilgrimages to it, and it places to not just have a ritual where you mark the goodbye to somebody, but you would go there to picnic and hang out, a garden and of beauty. And this is not the only one, but this was the first one, and Unitarians had a big influence on making that happen. And you can see that growing too in the second generation of Unitarianism, right? The transcendentalists who understood that we do experience the holy, the divine in nature, and their affirmation that death is part of the natural cycle was part of that. When that particular cemetery was opened, uh, there was a speech given, and it was by Judge Joseph Story, who turned out to be a Unitarian. He was on the Massachusetts Supreme Court. And basically, if you read his speech, it's a summarized Unitarian domestication of death by nature. That's what Earl Holt said. So anyway, there have been other garden cemeteries opened since then, 24 years after Mount Auburn opened, Sleepy Hollow in Concord opened, and that's where so many of the luminary transcendentalists are buried. So this is part of the legacy left to us by some of our very specific religious ancestors. So that's something I think I draw on as I think about um, our role, because another role that I think we've played is when there was in the United States kind of this uprising about the professionalization of death and the hiding it away and the making it very expensive. Unitarian Universalist congregations were places where memorial societies and funeral consumer alliances found welcome homes in order to make sure that people could have a fair chance and not be taken advantage of during the process of burying their loved ones. So that's another place in which we have a legacy that has served many people, not just those in our faith movement. The other part that I draw on when I think about legacy is something that I learned in my training as an end of life doula, a death doula. That training, what kind of suggested that the role of a death doula is in three parts. One is life review and legacy building. One is the vigil while someone is dying and the care of the body immediately after. And then the third is tending to the grief of those who've survived. So I want to just like hone in on one aspect of that legacy building, and that's the concept of an ethical will. This is something that comes out of Judaism that in that tradition has been around for over a millennia. But it's something that has come and gone and has a modern example or emergence, a shape now that is beyond Judaism. So an ethical will, when we think of wills, we think of it tells if we have possessions, where they will go. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's physical possessions. An ethical will is how we distribute information about the values we have and that we want to live on beyond our lives. So it can be something, actually, I think there are three kinds of ethical wills. I want to name what I think that they are. One is they might be a specific message to specific people. Like you think of, he didn't write this on his deathbed or anticipating he would die, but President Barack Obama, he wrote a letter to my daughters. You can think of that as a form of ethical will, right? So there's a message to specific people. There's a declaration of values and vision. I believed in the earth being saved and doing what I could, right? That's a declaration of what my life stood for. So that's a second kind of ethical will. And the third is a reflection on life lived. This is how I lived my life. These are the important markers of it, or when I had to turn on a dime because I faced this challenge. So three, message to specific people, declaration of values or vision, or reflection of life lived. And these are not three totally separate things. Frankly, they can intermix and become one document. But an ethical will is a chance to leave a legacy that those who are paying attention to your life after you have gone, they can hear your voice still. So it's a gift that we can leave.
Oh, so has been so great listening to you talk about like this legacy, this legacy of the cemetery specifically. As you were telling that story, I was reminded of the gardens that I saw in Romania in the cemeteries. And I was so surprised because they were growing things like sage and rosemary. And there was even a vegetable garden on one of the plots, and it was so beautiful because it was like had a little fence around it, and a different cemetery. There were fold up benches everywhere, so like you could fold down the bench to sit to visit. Like it became part of that building a community around the cemetery was so important that people would build in seats to make sure that they were a little comfortable. And you could see remnants of like flowers that people would bring to honor their loved ones. And yeah, so just thinking about like this legacy of seeing the care that was so important for the people of Romania, and knowing that that tradition carried over to Unitarianism here, it's just really amazing and beautiful connection. So I love it. I was like, oh, I have to tell this story. And so it makes me also, when we talk about legacy and what legacy means, there's this quote that I carry kind of in my heart about legacy. And it's from Peter Strople, and he says, legacy is not leaving something for people, it's leaving something in people. And so there's this process of thinking about legacy being something that it being only about like leaving a will or only about our physical assets or making sure that things go the way that we want them to. But that's one part of legacy. The part of legacy that I work with primarily is thinking about what are your values that you're instilling in the future? How are you connecting with people that will carry on your legacy? How do we can't all have our name on a library, right, at a university. So how do you make your impact, and how do you make sure that that lasts longer than your physical body? And it makes me think a lot about our UU ancestors, right? Who wrote these beautiful, sermons that we still read today. Like I remember in seminary, like reading, sermons from like these very important UUs, right? Reading the words of Thomas Starr King, right? Reading the words of Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, right? Like all of these things are part of their legacy. And, we didn't have Snapchat then. We didn't have, TikTok. So like it was all about like what we could hold on to and what we could share and how we could share it. And these things were often shared in public spaces. And we got really lucky that they wrote it down. And so we get to hold on to that and keep those things and share them. And so their words live on because their words live on and also their values live on. Things that matter to them live on. Um, these things become foundational to who we are as Unitarian Universalists in this moment. And it's because we have those records, because we have that legacy to look back to and refer to often. Um, it also makes me think about the way that we just went through this big process of adjusting our seven principles and incorporating our new values. And so, what does it mean for these values in this moment to have them? And how do we make sure that we are building a legacy around incorporating those values into our language, into the way that we live, and the way that we love each other? um, those things become really, really important, like as they're forming. So, I know one of the big conversations that we had specifically in Unitarian Universalism was, oh, like the seven principles, they're going away. I don't want them to go away. It's like they're not going away. They're part of our legacy. They will never go away, right? We will always go back to them. But what does it mean to then bring in something new? We learned things over the past 20 years, and now we get to incorporate those things that we've learned. And so therefore, I'm talking about this in a big macro scale of Unitarian Universalism, but as an individual, it's the same thing. Like we have these values, we have these rules that we live by, we have these practices that keep us going and keep us grounded. And so, how do we then take what we have inside of us and use it to share with other people so that it continues on, so the best of us continues on? And so for me, the building of legacy is about making sure that we are cultivating a practice of liberation, cultivating care, making sure that we can dream about a thing and aspire to it and do everything that we can to get there. There's no guarantee that that will happen, but if we don't even dream about it, we can't even imagine it, it can't ever be a reality. And so that's what legacy is all about. It's about having those big picture dreams about what can outlast you, how you make people feel, the values that you share, the love that you spread, and being able to take all of those things and move it forward into the next generation.
Wow. So I have some thoughts that have sparked because of what you just said, and then I have some questions for you that harken back to what you said around grief and altars and ancestors. So can I just jump right in?
Please do.
Great, cool. So first of all, I am just tickled. My spirit is tickled with the idea that on a plot where somebody is buried deep into the ground, that on top of it that there might be vegetables growing. Like talk about understanding that there is a circle, a cycle of life, and that death does not have to be something that we need to be scared of, but it can actually nourish us. How delightful. And especially because bodies typically are buried far enough down that like those plants are not going to have a problem with somehow being contaminated, which is one of the fears that we have, right? And I know in the section on interdependence, I'm going to talk about green burial, and that is one of the barriers that people come up about. Like, if we don't have like concrete to protect us, is it gonna hurt us? So this idea of legacy is one where I feel deep contradiction within myself. Like, oh, I want this and I want this. And it reminds me of a conversation I had when I did clinical pastoral education to become a minister. We do it in a group of people. I was at a hospital and one of my cohort was Jewish. And I am Unitarian Universalist and Buddhist. And she said, wow, it sounds like your job is to like let go of everything, like to not remember anyone. And in Judaism, our job is to remember. And it felt to her like those two were a contradiction, and they might be, but I think I feel pulled in multiple ways, both to remember and also to let go. And legacy is so much about how do we create a way to remember somebody or to be remembered in the far future. I certainly, like you, appreciate having sermons of some of my heroes or writings of some of my sheroes available to me. And, you know, when I think about what I want to have happen to my body when I die, I'm hoping for a green burial. I, I'm, I'm not going to have my name somewhere for somebody to come and visit me, not because I don't want that, but just because I think part of my legacy is to not be heavy on the earth. So that's a thing where I'm tussling myself with like, what does legacy mean? And I don't know if that brings anything for you.
So many things. I love that idea of like of tussling of wanting to be remembered, but also, the reality of, you know, we are we're a burden on the earth, right? Like there is so much like effort it takes in, a traditional burial process. And I'll just say that for me, like I want a water cremation. So for me, it's like also thinking about, okay, so what's going to cause the least amount of harm to the earth? And it's important to think about that. And there's nothing wrong with deciding, you know what, all of this is too much, and I just want a regular burial, or all of this is too much. I'm just gonna let, my loved ones make that decision for me. Like that is valid. And also, I think that the thing that we don't talk about enough is how important choice is. We get to choose what we want. We get to choose what's important to us. We get to choose what we prioritize. Even if other people get to make the final decisions ultimately, while you are alive, you get to choose, you get to decide like what you want. And so, um, in thinking about legacy, like, we talk a lot about, we talk a lot about like, oh, like, this is what I want and this is what I need. And we're all trying to make the best decision based off the information that we know, right? Like, oh, we're now learning that like a traditional cremation is not as good for the environment for X, Y, and Z reasons. And then, oh, and this one is not because of this. And then you mentioned like the green burial, people were concerned about contaminating the ground, like all of those things, right? And so it's just about like using the information that you have to make the best decision for you in that moment. Your mind can change, you can get new information. Um, Technology can change. I mean, water cremation wasn't even available 5 years ago, and now it is. When my dog Macy Moon died late last year, I opted to do water cremation for her. And I felt really good about making that decision for her, knowing that I get to hold her, close, her ashes, stay with me, but also knowing that like, I got to make that decision and to take care of her in a way that felt good for me. And I could learn differently, in the future, and I can make different choices in the future. So legacy is also about choice. Like I just keep saying that over and over. Like
Mm.
it's about the act of choice, about getting to decide, about using the information that you have to make the best decision for you in this moment. And that can change. And then also, I'm thinking a lot about what you're saying about like that pull between remembering and letting go, and just being reminded that there's so many ways to remember, right? Like that's why I love art so much. Like you were mentioned about not having like a placard where people can go and like visit and see. But I could see a beautiful wall mural in a room of a church with your face, with swirling beautiful reds and purples, and it's called the Reverend Karen G. Johnston Room, right? Like that is a legacy. That is a place to go. Uh, there's a small congregation that has a Frances Ellen Watkins Harper room. And whenever I visit that church, I always go to that room. And they just have like a small, like line drawing of her. And I love to go to just say hi. And, it's a silly thing I like to do, but like having those things, like, it's important to like be able to go and see and to have that moment of connection. And we don't always have that, and that's okay. But there's a reason why when you go into these major universities and there are these giant, paintings of the presidents of the school, right? Like it's not just like, oh, like we might forget what they look like. It's, oh, this person made an impact in this way, and like we're honoring them in this way. And so I encourage everyone to think creatively about like what legacy could be in its like visual representation. It doesn't have to be a headstone. It doesn't have to be a plaque. It can literally be anything. It can be, a tattoo. Like it can be, there's so many ways to remember. And that remembering doesn't necessarily require letting go.
Mm, mm. That is an important thing. I think about how you were talking about altars, and that when you create altars as part of a grief process, you are bringing our ancestors or those who've died to around us rather than just inside us, or at least that's what I took away from what you said. And I think creating altars is an act of creativity. And I think about your art and legacy building there. But I'm also just struck here about how, in order to really get I guess it's the trajectory of a legacy that we might leave, it requires us, or it invites us, maybe is a better way to say it. It invites us to look back first before projecting into the future. And I say this in part because I'm so lucky to serve where I do in Burlington, Vermont. And I feel that I was called here, not just by the current congregation, but because I understand my ministry in the same lineage as Joshua Young, who was a minister who served her in Burlington. He officiated at John Brown's funeral. He was an Underground Railroad conductor with his wife, Mary Plimpton, in Boston. And I locate myself in his lineage, and I'm able to do that because boy, did he make sure that his narrative of his ministry was known by the world. He wasn't treated well here in Burlington, at a certain point. So I'm realizing, right, that legacy isn't just from here forward. It starts back there and through here. And that's a good way to then be able to find one's right path towards what legacy we might leave.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you said that because that imagery of it doesn't start here, like here with me. It starts way back and it's like you are part of a legacy that's already been built, right? Like you're part of what already exists. And so your job isn't to create a legacy from scratch. It really is like drawing from what already exists and adding your part to it to propel it forward. It's all about that forward motion of I am here because they were, and the next generation will be because I was, right? And so like just thinking about like what all of that means, it's like you don't have to do this alone, which is, what leads us right into interdependence.
I want to start in this section that's on interdependence with a quote from Helene Norberg Hodge. She's an ecologist, an activist like really focusing on local as one of the ways that we save each other. And she said, though we yearn for the understanding of interdependence and believe that such an understanding can heal our suffering, let us not underestimate the profound effects of 2,000 years of a vastly different worldview. I really appreciate this reminder because I am often aware of the gap between my aspirations and my lived experience of interdependence and my own kind of lived reality of how sometimes I can like feel alone or feel that I must go forward by myself. And then I go, oh, right, because there's been a lot of messaging that tells us that we are not interdependent. And that is something that I need to tend to, but is not of my making. And I can be kind and gentle on myself as it's a process of personal unlearning and collective unlearning. So I've loved the chance to think about interdependence as it relates to mortality, as it relates to death and dying, uh, and where I've landed. And frankly, I'm wondering 5 years from now, when I look back on this, how much of it I'll say, yeah, I still believe that, or oh, that was an interesting thought experiment that Karen was in trying out. But I think through my Buddhism, I really understand the difference between pain, which is unavoidable, and suffering, with which we can be in relationship with and shape, minimize. Pain we can't stop, but the suffering, our relationship to the pain, we do have some influence on. And so it makes me think that while we have probably always been afraid of pain, um, I'm wondering if we humans globally, before a time when maybe even history comes down to us, when we understood that death is just part of our life cycle, that we might not have been afraid of death. Right. So, in that way, that sometimes I'll hear some of my congregants say, I'll experience sometimes it's not death I'm afraid of, it's the dying, especially if I'm uncomfortable, that scares me. And I wonder if that might be a human thing, that if we didn't have those 2,000 years of telling us that we are separate, we also might be okay with death because, well, I've had the mystical experience of knowing that we all come from somewhere and we all go back to the same place. And it's a thing that I did not ask to know. And so I can't unwill myself from knowing it, but I also can't will you to know that. Um, so it makes me think, or it makes me wonder how our not just intellectual thought about interdependence, but our practicing into that unlearned knowledge in our bodies, hearts, and minds can help us approach or experience the decay that comes with age or death, no matter when it comes, as as not a scary thing or not a wrong thing. I think so often we think of it as wrong. And I think that is that sense of wrongness or being wronged when death comes out of that individualism, that lack of connection to the interdependence of all things. I kind of laugh when we as Unitarian Universalists claim as a value interdependence. And frankly, I love our principles and I love our core values. So it's not about that. It's that I think it's just the nature of reality. It's not a value. So it's not like we get, a value is like we made it. It's just we're like affirming a thing that's true. It's like a fact, but uh, it helps us to highlight it since there is this other narrative that's trying to tell us, we are on our own. Um, I love this quote. So here's another quote that I want to bring to you. This is from the Zen Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, who died just a few years ago. Because this is what I aspire to when it comes to my attitude towards death and dying. This comes from his book, No Death, No Fear, Comforting Wisdom for Life. And maybe you've heard it before. This body is not me. I am not caught in this body. I am life without boundaries. I have never been born and I have never died. Over there, the wide ocean and the sky with many galaxies all manifests from the basis of consciousness. Since beginningless time, I have always been free. Birth and death are only a door through which we go in and out. Birth and death are only a game of hide and seek. There's something that deeply resonates for me in that. I don't live in that space all the time, but when I can touch it and get closer, I know I feel wiser. I feel like I am not going to struggle when it comes my time. So it's a gift that I think is accessible to us when we are called to engage with that value, and that's why it's important that we name it as a value. because it calls us to say, oh, I need to practice this in order to decenter that that narrative at the beginning that we're separate.
So one of the things that comes up a lot in my work with people, whether it's a workshop or it is a retreat, we always talk about how isolating grief is and how isolating it can be. But it's one of those experiences that we all share. If you've ever loved, if you've ever been connected to another person, another being, you have, you had that grief, you pulled that grief. And so we have this collective experience that we're having separated in isolation. And that's not the way that we should be. We should be able to share our pain, um, to connect with each other so that we're not alone. One of the things that one of my first instances of thinking about or remembering like grief and someone dying was, someone bringing a casserole over to a close family friend and like just having a fridge full of food. Like everybody brought food. I'm from the South. I'm from Georgia, and so we love food, but like everybody brought a dish, and we didn't have to like cook or think about food for at least a week, maybe two. And also, having those moments of like people just sending you messages and saying, I'm thinking about you, I'm here for you. Um, all of those things like work toward creating an interdependence and reminding us that we're not alone and that our grief doesn't have to be held in a solitary way. And so, in thinking about that, I'm also thinking about the definition of doulaship. There are lots of people that have real issue with the term doula because it has a lot of negative connotations of service and um, of being indebted to. But this reclaiming of the term doulaship is about community. It's about having that support of connecting people who are experiencing a thing. We have birth doulas, we have death doulas, we have grief doulas, like anything that allows for people to come together to be connected so that they're not alone in a major moment is really important and really critical to how we think about ourselves in community, but also how we build our legacy again to move forward. If we are setting an example in this moment that you don't have to do this alone, that means that the next generation also has that knowledge and power to connect to each other so that they're not alone. And so the point of it all is being interconnected and knowing that you get to bring all the parts of yourself into a space and you're held in it, you're loved in it, you are cared for in that moment. And the realization that you don't have to do any of it alone. I think that's so important. And I just say it over and over again. Like, this is how we love each other. We're connected. You can't love in isolation. And you can grieve in isolation, but it's better when you don't. And so, I remember when my dear beloved best friend, Matthew Taylor, died just a couple of years ago. And I remember feeling so alone, like in those first moments. But people called me like every day. Like there are people that called me every day for a month just to check on me, just to make sure that I ate something, that I drank something, that I was breathing, right? And so that moment and that collective care. I don't know if they coordinated this, but like I mean it was literally like every day and and then people would come back and it was just so loving and beautiful. And in that moment of that grief, I was so consumed by it, but also like there are these people that were caring for me in this moment and I couldn't sink into that grief far enough for it to overtake me. It was a holding. They held me until I could be able to hold myself. And I can't express how much that care saved me in that moment. And in the following months, as I lost, more people, because, it was the pandemic and people died, and, it was hard. It was so hard, but it would have been made so much harder had I not had community to lean on in that moment. And so, that care, I'm thinking a lot about what you said about like people being afraid of the process of dying. um as a child, it's like I was always afraid of death. Like I was always afraid of dying. Like I would wake up crying to my mom saying, oh no, I don't want to die and I don't want you to die, and like, dying is a no. And then, as I got older and I started to learn more and doing my own research and understanding, the different faith traditions and their rituals and traditions around death, like it became not something to fear, but something to understand and to live with. And when I became a death doula, it became, oh, like now I can explain this to other people. Now I can hold other people in their hard feelings and their fear around the process of dying. And so it became more about um, understanding the process. And I find that when people understand the process, it is so much easier to let go of that fear and to let go of those scary bits of not knowing what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen, but if we understand the process and like what it might look like, if so and so, like if it's this way, if it's that way, like it feels, at least for my anxiety, it feels a little bit easier to understand it as a natural process of living.
I just want to recognize that you spoke to something very tender on your heart. So thank you for extending yourself in that way. And I trust for you to ground yourself in that grief. I feel appreciation thinking about when you were speaking about grief and love, and we talked about sort of like how those are one thing, two different sides of one thing. I love this concept that we practice interdependence through community care when grief is upon us or is upon someone in our community. And we maybe strengthen the fabric of interdependence that's already there that can't go away because we ignore it, but can't be weakened when we work against it. And so these acts of care, the acts of care you experienced after your friend died, the acts of care that we make possible in congregational life, and I know it happens in other communities, but I'm a big fan of congregational life as a chance to practice all the muckiness, all the muddiness, all the clumsiness, but also all these amazing moments where we show up for each other in a way that says, go to hell, you narrative that tells us that can do it on our own, right? So thank you for that reminder that when we do community care, when we bring the casseroles, when we walk the dogs, when we check in, even when somebody says you don't have to, that these are a form of embodying love at the center as it relates to the fact of our mortality and that we want to affirm that interdependence. So really appreciate that take on something that we just kind of think as part of congregational life.
Yeah, I mean, we just, we have these practices that we've always done these things. We've always done this caretaking, but we don't really think about the history of it, the impact of it, and how important it is for that community building. We spend a lot of time just doing the next thing, right? The next right thing. Which is really, really important. And like as we think about legacy and what's important, like what part of that next right thing do we need to make sure continues? There's a congregation that sends out care cards when people are sick, right? And so when you're sick, you're going to get like a handmade card from this particular person who's on the care team because that is their ministry. And so when that person goes, like everyone's going to remember, oh, like I love that whenever I was sick, like this person would send me a card and it made me feel better to know that they were thinking of me. And so when they're gone, who is going to continue that? Who's going to follow that tradition that is so important to the care in the community of people who got to experience this? And often some of our traditions do fall away. It becomes thing, oh, this was a thing that we used to do that felt really good, and we just didn't have anyone to continue it. And that's okay too. It gets to be a memory, but also those things can come back, right? We can decide, oh, actually, our community really needs a card making ministry. Let's reassemble that. Let's bring that back. And so I'm always heartened by like the ways that we make meaning and we find meaning in those small acts of kindness, and we find a way to let them continue on, whether in memory or in story or in actual practice of passing it on.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Here we are again. What do we let go? What do we bring back? What do we nourish so that it's sustained?
Yes.
I want to just raise up in this conversation about interdependence. You know, the value, I'm going to read it out loud here. I am doing a lot of reading. We honor the interdependent web of all life. We covenant to cherish Earth and all beings by creating and nurturing relationships of care and respect. With humility and reverence, we acknowledge our place in the great web of life, and we work to repair harm and damaged relationships. I feel so thankful, especially for that last line, in part because I think that's how we understand all forms of accountable relationships, especially when we think about how the eighth principle is sprinkled throughout these core values, right? That dismantling of systems of oppression, in particular racism. But I've been thinking about how in that articulation of interdependence, there's not an explicit pointer to mortality, and that, and yet part of I was raised thinking that I would be cremated. My parents were cremated. Um, but I have come, and this is my choice. Like you said before, everyone makes their own choices based on finances and values and what you have access to, all those things. But my choice has shifted to green burial in part because it is one of my acts of repair towards the earth, right? This damaged relationship where in many of the ways that in the United States, where we went towards embalming, where we went towards separation from nature, that we began to damage ourselves and the earth and our relationship with. And so I have shifted, and I know that there is a lot of support, but not a requirement for green burial within Unitarian Universalism. Um, and that seems to me part of how, not just in my life, but in my dying, in my death, that I can affirm this reality. So our presentation is coming to an end, and it's been lovely to be able to share things and then also to spark off of each other. And we hope that it's been good for you as well. And at the end of this, Reverend JeKaren's going to talk to you about ways in which you can engage with us. But we have in our notes this question of, do we have a vision for Unitarian Universalism? And we both have a short answer. As a parish minister, one of the things that I actually just invited / challenged the congregation I'm serving to do is I will regularly say that dying at home is a team sport. And there are plenty of people who say they want to die at home, and then when the time comes, either they can't or actually they decide that that's not the best for their circumstances at that time. But I have a wish that more and more of our congregations could equip ourselves to be able to have teams of people so that when somebody wants to die at home, that there is a team of people to support them or their loved ones so that that is possible. So that's one of my visions for Unitarian Universalism when it comes to mortality.
I love that. I think that's a beautiful way of holding space and building community. For me, I think my vision for Unitarian Universalism is really simple. I want us to keep talking about it. I want to keep having opportunities to brainstorm and to spark off each other and to dream and think about what it means to hold grief and what it means to die well and all the complications that we didn't even get to touch on around dying. Like I want us to keep doing that. And I want us to do a better job of like being more connected to each other because none of this matters if we have to do it alone. And so, this meeting mortality moment, as our workshop is called, is just about connecting to each other and having more opportunities to do that. So, that is my vision for Unitarian Universalism.
And where can people find out more about the work and the ministry that you do in the world?
So, my work and ministry can be found at wisdomoflegacy.com. And there you can find listings for upcoming workshops, retreats, and other offerings that I might sprinkle in. None of it is specifically about death and dying, but it's all about death and dying. So, do with that information as you will. And what about you? Where can we find information about you?
So you can go to datewithdeathclub.com, and there you'll find information about this approach to learning in community with more creativity than conformity about how to approach mortality. And you can request the free curriculum that you can bring to your community wherever you want. There's also a link to a podcast interview that I did with End of Life University. So that's a place to go. I have a blog called awakeandwitness.net, and you can find some of my writings there. So
Beautiful.
that's where you find me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And we just want to share a little bit about what's next. So we have scheduled a meetup at GA on Thursday at 9 a.m. in the Baltimore Convention Center. We'll be in room 318. And then after GA, we're going to meet again on Tuesday, the 24th, right after GA at 12 noon Eastern Time. The Zoom link will be available in the handout notes attached to this session. So it has been such a pleasure to be here with you, Reverend Karen, and also all of you. We can't wait to meet you and talk to you about this in person. This whole session has just been us speaking about all the things that matter so much to us. And so we can't wait to share that with you.
Yay!